The galaxy had long been a patchwork of peace, its vast reaches bound by delicate treaties, fragile alliances, and complex diplomacy. For centuries, various species had found ways to coexist, their differences settled through talks and agreements, never through war. The Galactic Council, a powerful assembly of leaders from the many species that inhabited the stars, held the reins of this fragile order. They believed themselves to be the guardians of peace, with their diplomatic prowess and quiet strength, keeping the galaxy from descending into chaos. Among them was humanity, a newly discovered species that had only recently joined the galactic fold. The humans were an enigma, a species whose history was marred by war, struggle, and violence, a sharp contrast to the peaceful ways of their neighbors. The other species viewed humans with suspicion, unsure of how their turbulent past would influence their role in the galaxy. For years, the humans had kept to their corner of the universe, watching and learning, slowly building their strength in silence. Their fleet, small and unassuming at first, grew steadily, its members quietly preparing for an inevitable moment. And then, that moment came. The Zaxi, an insectoid species known for their savagery and ruthless conquests, made a bold and dangerous move. They declared war on a neutral planet, one that had long been protected by humanity. It was a planet that held no military value, but represented something much more significant: peace itself. The Zaxi had crossed a line, but to the Galactic Council, it seemed just another dispute to be resolved with diplomacy. The Council dismissed humanity's concerns, confident that their peaceful methods would suffice. After all, they had never seen humanity in action, had never felt the weight of their power. But to the humans, this was not just another diplomatic failure. This was a call to arms. It was an insult to everything they stood for. Humanity's first reaction wasn't one of fear, but of resolve. They could not, and would not, stand idly by while the innocent were crushed beneath the Zaxi's brutal claws. The Council's blind trust in diplomacy had failed. Humanity knew, better than anyone, that sometimes words were not enough. Sometimes, action was required. In the dead of night, the human fleet, led by Admiral Claire Voss, silently assembled. Their ships, sleek and silent, glided into formation, their engines humming quietly as they readied for a confrontation, unlike any the Vi Galaxy had seen before. It was not a war they sought, but one that was now unavoidable. The humans understood this. For years, they had watched the galaxy turn a blind eye to tyranny, to injustice. This time, humanity would not allow it. They would make the galaxy hear their voice, even if it had to come through the roar of their weapons. Without warning, a single message was broadcast across the stars, a simple yet ominous warning. War will come to those who refuse peace. The galaxy will witness the strength of humanity. It wasn't a boast, it was a promise. The words were clear and sharp, cutting through the silence of space like a blade. The galaxy was not prepared for it. The Zaxi certainly weren't prepared for it. No one was prepared for what was coming. The Council, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. The Zaxi, too, were caught by surprise. They had always relied on their brutal strength to overpower their enemies, but they had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated the depth of their resolve and the fire that burned within them. The humans, far from being an easy target, were becoming a force that could not be ignored. As the first wave of human ships moved toward the Zaxi forces, a cold realization swept over the galaxy. Humanity had chosen war, but not for the reasons others might have assumed. They did not seek conquest. They sought justice. And they were willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. What began as a single act of defiance was now setting the stage for something much larger, a war that would ripple through the galaxy, leaving nothing untouched by its wake. The Council, the peaceful species, and even the Zaxi would come to realize that when humanity spoke, it wasn't with empty words. It was with action. The galaxy was about to witness what true strength looked like, and it would never be the same again. The Zaxi were blindsided. For all their might and ferocity, they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating humanity. Their focus was fixed on their ongoing campaigns of terror, ravaging planets and sowing fear across the galaxy. But they didn't see what was coming. They didn't anticipate the humans' swift and brutal retaliation. Under the command of Admiral Claire Voss, humanity's fleet launched the first strike. An attack so precise, so devastating, that it left the Zaxi reeling. The human ships, sleek and powerful, were armed with technology far beyond what the insectoid species had ever encountered. The Zaxi had grown used to their own brutal tactics, overwhelming force, terror, and sheer numbers, but they had never met an adversary like this. Admiral Voss and her fleet knew one thing above all else. There could be no hesitation. There could be no mercy. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, and now it would respond with everything it had. With a single coordinated strike, the human ships tore through the Zaxi fleet like a storm. Energy blasts crackled through space, piercing enemy ships with surgical precision, while human vessels darted through the chaos with unmatched agility. The Zaxi, accustomed to being the aggressors, were now on the defensive. They scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. Humanity had already proven itself as a force to be reckoned with. The humans fought with a kind of relentless determination that the Zaxi had never known. There were no retreating forces, no hesitation. The human soldiers fought with everything in them, driven by a singular purpose: protect the innocent, ensure that the Zaxi would never again threaten the galaxy in the same way. Each battle became more than just a fight for survival. It was a message. The Zaxi had thought they could dominate the galaxy with fear and strength, but humanity showed them a different way. The Zaxi ships that had once terrorized peaceful planets were now reduced to floating wreckage, their shattered remains drifting in the vast emptiness of space. As the first wave of humanity's war unfolded, the scale of the destruction was breathtaking. Entire Zaxi fleets were wiped out in moments, the battlefields littered with the remains of the insectoid ships. The Zaxi never had a chance to recover. Their tactics, effective against lesser species, were useless against humanity's. Speed, precision, and sheer ferocity. It was a brutal lesson, one they would not soon forget. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the debris drifted in the wake of the battle, word spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Humanity had made its choice. The message was clear. It wasn't just a skirmish. It was the first strike in a war that would change everything. As reports poured in from all corners of the galaxy, the other species began to realize that humanity was not what they had thought. They were not a passive, weak species waiting to be molded by others. They were fierce warriors, capable of bringing down entire fleets with the force of a single, coordinated attack. Those who had underestimated humanity found themselves facing a reality they had never expected. The Zaxi were reeling, their forces shattered and disorganized, their reputation in tatters. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time in centuries, the peaceful species of the Council were no longer certain of their place in the grand scheme of things. The message humanity had sent through its devastating strike wasn't just for the Zaxi, it was for everyone. The galaxy would no longer be a place where power was defined by who could dominate through terror. Humanity had shown that they could fight, and fight hard. They had shown that when pushed, they could strike, with unmatched precision and power. This wasn't just about defeating the Zaxi. It was about establishing humanity as a force to be reckoned with, one that would no longer stand in the shadows of the Galactic Council. And as the smoke cleared, the question that lingered in the minds of the galaxy's leaders was simple yet terrifying. What would humanity do next? The Zaxi had fallen, but this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and humanity's resolve was stronger than ever. The news of humanity's Declaration of war rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. For centuries, the peaceful species of the Galactic Council had relied on diplomacy to settle their disputes, and they could not fathom the violence that humanity was willing to unleash. It was unthinkable. How could such a seemingly small, recent addition to the interstellar fold make such a bold move? The council members, each one a leader of their respective species, sat in stunned silence as the implications of humanity's actions sank in. The Zaxi had been a threat, yes. But now, in the wake of humanity's attack, the galaxy's entire balance seemed to hang in the air, waiting to tip into chaos. The once steady hand of diplomacy was now trembling. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session, urgency flooding the chambers. Some races, like the peaceful Vrix, urged for immediate peace talks. They argued that humanity's attack was simply a reaction driven by fear and anger, that it was not the beginning of a full-scale war. They believed that with the right words, calm could be restored, and humanity could be convinced to step back from the brink. But others, such as the Korthari, a telepathic species known for their unparalleled wisdom and understanding of galactic affairs, knew the gravity of the situation. The Korthari sensed something deeper in humanity's response, something that went beyond mere emotion. They understood that the humans were not reacting out of anger, but out of necessity. Their decision to strike wasn't rash, it was deliberate. Humanity had long watched as the galaxy ignored the suffering of the weak. And when the Zaxi struck, humanity had finally drawn its line in the sand. It wasn't just the Zaxi they were fighting. They were fighting for the idea of peace itself, something they valued deeply, but understood could not be achieved by merely sitting at a table. Yet, despite the wisdom of the Korthari, a growing fear was taking root in the council. Whispers of dread began to spread through the chambers. What if humanity's thirst for war didn't end with the Zaxi? What if their victory over the insectoid species was merely the first step in a larger, more terrifying campaign? If humanity could move with such precision and power against the Zaxi, what would stop them from turning their gaze elsewhere? What if their relentless drive for justice would pull the entire galaxy into a never-ending war? Would they become the next force of tyranny? The council members couldn't ignore the possibility that humanity's rise might spell the end of the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. But amidst the growing uncertainty, one thing was clear. The humans were not afraid. They weren't hiding in the shadows, waiting for permission to act. Their resolve was unwavering, their determination unyielding. And in the wake of their attack, they had sent another message, a quiet broadcast that spread across the galaxy, from the smallest moons to the grandest planets. It wasn't loud, it didn't demand attention, but its simplicity resonated through the hearts of all who heard it. We fight for those who cannot. We fight for the future of the galaxy. The war has already begun. Those words were not a boast, nor were they a threat. They were a declaration, one that rang with the clarity of truth. Humanity wasn't seeking war for the sake of conquest. They were fighting for a future where the innocent would no longer be pawns in the hands of the powerful. They were fighting for a galaxy where peace would no longer be something that could be ignored or trampled underfoot. As the council deliberated, the galaxy's gaze shifted toward humanity. The quiet message had been heard in every corner of the stars. And now, everyone waited to see what humanity would do next. Would they continue their war against the Zaxi, or would their victory embolden them to target those who had once stood beside them in the council? The Zaxi were no longer the threat they had been, but the true question was whether humanity's wrath would burn across the galaxy, sparking conflict with everyone it touched. The stakes had never been higher, and the galaxy was on edge, watching, waiting, unsure of what the next move would be. Humanity had set the stage, and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance, a future no one could yet see clearly. As the war continued, the Zaxi were no longer the only species to fear humanity's growing might. Across the galaxy, other races, some peaceful, others powerful, began to take notice of humanity's relentless drive. The Zaxi were formidable, but humanity's resolve, innovation, and unyielding determination marked a new era. Some species, especially those with vast power and influence, began to grow uneasy. They feared that humanity, having destroyed the Zaxi, would soon turn its sights on them, seeking to overrun and dominate. Others, however, saw humanity not as a threat, but as a new force of balance, an unpredictable element in a galaxy riddled with conflict and chaos. The once stable equilibrium of power was starting to crumble under the weight of humanity's unrelenting rise. But as the war raged on, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity was not merely fighting to survive. They had crossed the point of no return. The fight had become something bigger. They were fighting for control, for the future they believed in, and for the idea that the strong must protect the weak, that peace should be earned, not handed down through treaties and diplomacy. Humanity was reshaping the galaxy in their image, a galaxy that had grown complacent with corruption and endless strife. And leading this charge was Admiral Claire Voss, whose name had become synonymous with human strength and tenacity. Voss had become more than just a leader. She had become a symbol. Under her command, humanity's fleet, the Vanguard, had transformed from a simple military force into a coalition of like-minded warriors, united by a single cause. They pushed deeper, into Zaxi-held space, never relenting, never retreating. What had begun as a limited campaign to rescue one neutral planet had quickly evolved into a full-scale war, one with the potential to change the very foundation of the galaxy. The Zaxi, known for their aggressive nature and ability to overpower, with sheer numbers, were now being hunted and hunted ruthlessly. The humans didn't just engage in battle, they adapted. Where the Zaxi relied on brute force, the humans innovated, using tactics and technology that left their enemies baffled. Humanity's technological advancements were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Zaxi, who had relied on their massive insectoid ships and destructive weapons, were unprepared for the sheer brilliance of human ingenuity. The human fleet began to unveil new technologies at an alarming rate, technologies that shifted the balance of power in their favor. Hyper-advanced AI warships, faster and more deadly than anything the Zaxi had, now formed the core of humanity's forces. Energy shields capable of withstanding a dozen direct hits kept human ships safe in the most intense battles. And then there was the Talon bomb, an experimental weapon, one that humanity had kept secret until now. Capable of destroying entire star systems in a single blast, it was a weapon of unimaginable power, a game-changer that would forever alter the course of the war. With each new battle won, humanity's reputation continued to grow. What had once been a single strike in defense of a neutral planet had become a campaign for dominance. The galaxy could no longer ignore what humanity had become, a force of nature, driven not just by the desire to defend, but by the will to reshape everything. And with every victory, humanity's message rang louder and clearer. It was no longer just a threat whispered in dark corners. It had become a declaration of supremacy. "We fight for the future of the galaxy," humanity said, not in words, but in the devastation they left in their wake. The other species in the galaxy began to feel the weight of humanity's rise. Some tried to make peace, to offer concessions, but it was clear that humanity's goals had grown far beyond simple negotiations. Humanity wasn't looking to coexist with the existing powers of the galaxy. They were looking to dominate, to forge a new path, one where the strong would be the protectors, not the oppressors. And with each passing day, the galaxy watched in awe and fear as humanity revealed just how terrifying their potential could be. Every new weapon, every battle won, only cemented the realization that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Zaxi had felt the full brunt of humanity's power, and soon, the rest of the galaxy would learn the same lesson. humanity's rise was inevitable, and it was reshaping the galaxy with a fury that could not be stopped. As the war escalated, the true scope of the conflict began to unfold before the galaxy. What had started as a response to the Zaxi threat had grown into something far greater. The galaxy's inhabitants watched in awe and fear as humanity's military machine surged forward, an unstoppable force driven by an unrelenting purpose. The Zaxi, once the terrifying aggressors, had been brought to their knees, but in their fall, humanity had created a new kind of power dynamic, a power that stretched beyond a simple desire for survival. The human forces had proven themselves indomitable, fighting not just for their own preservation, but for the safety of every innocent life in the galaxy. The message humanity sent was clear. When faced with tyranny, we do not hesitate. We act. Admiral Claire Voss, the face of humanity's rise, had become both a hero and a symbol. But her final message to the Galactic Council was not one of triumph. It was a solemn declaration, a moment of reflection that conveyed the core of humanity's decision. In her words, the galaxy heard the terrible truth of humanity's choice. "We did not choose war because we love violence," she explained, her voice steady and unyielding. "We chose war because we had seen the horrors that come when power goes unchecked, when oppression is allowed to thrive. The Zaxi were only the beginning. We swore, from the moment we saw the suffering of innocent worlds, that we would never let such tyranny spread again. We chose war because words had become useless against the evil of silence." Her words echoed across the stars, resonating in the minds of every species who had once believed that diplomacy would always prevail. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now the consequences of their inaction were clear. Humanity was not fighting for conquest, nor for glory. They were fighting to protect those who could not defend themselves, to put an end to oppression, and to ensure that no more species would suffer at the hands of those who believed they were above others. The war had taken on a new meaning, one that transcended the battle between humans and the Zaxi. It had become a fight for the soul of the galaxy itself. As the Zaxi Empire crumbled, their once mighty fleets reduced to ruins, the galaxy was left in stunned silence. The battlefields were quiet, the void of space now holding the weight of a new reality. Humanity had emerged victorious, not through sheer numbers, but through the strength of their will, their determination to end the cycle of tyranny that had plagued the stars. The cost had been immense, and the toll on both sides was clear. But the message humanity had sent was not just one of force. It was a reminder that when words fail, actions must speak louder. The galaxy had learned a painful lesson. When humanity chose war, it wasn't a decision made lightly. It was a necessity. With the fall of the Zaxi, a new era began. The galaxy, forever altered by humanity's rise, now lived in the shadow of their power. It was not the power of an empire, but the power of a species that had chosen to act when others had chosen inaction. A fragile peace was born from the terrifying realization that humanity had crossed a line, and there would be no going back. This new peace was not one born out of fear or submission, but one tempered with the understanding that, while humanity could be merciful, it could also be unforgiving. The galaxy would never forget the price of ignoring humanity's wills, and so, for the first time in centuries, the stars were quiet. There was no grand declaration of victory, no widespread celebration, only the quiet hum of the universe, holding its breath. The galaxy was left to wonder what humanity would do next. Would they continue their push for a new, safer order? Would they turn their gaze inward and leave the galaxy to sort itself out? Whatever happened, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in a long time, the other species of the Council knew that peace would no longer be guaranteed by treaties alone. Humanity had shown them that when it came to the defense of innocence, words were not enough. In the face of evil, sometimes only war could bring an end to suffering. The stars waited, silent and uncertain. As the future of the galaxy hung in the balance,